Well, we're live.
Uh, Greetings and salutations to all of you who are coming into this. My name is Kurt Cagle. I am the editor for the Cagle Report on LinkedIn. And today I have the great privilege and honor of introducing Dorian, I'm going to say it,
Coaches.
Kugias.
Coaches.
Kojas, thank you. I'm looking at that name and saying I'm going to mispronounce this because people always mispronounce mine. So I fully understand here. Um, Dorian is a pioneering researcher, a prolific author, and has been an entrepreneur with over 30 years of experience in IT compliance, governance, and risk management. As a co-founder and CEO of Unified Compliance, he spearheaded the development of the world's largest interconnected compliance database and design groundbreaking tools to streamline compliance mapping using AI and natural language processing. His work has led to the creation of over 20 patents, including innovations in compliance framework, database schemas, and automated compliance tools. So, without further ado, take it away, Dorian.
Well, thank you very much, Kurt. Really appreciate that. So, as you said, I got a little bit of a pedigree. As they say up in Fargo, am I qualified to give this prezzo? Oh, you betcha there. Uh, the prezzo isn't pretty. I watched the last couple prezzos before me, and they looked absolutely gorgeous. This one isn't. This one will make up for the pretty in functionality because all of the files that I've created for this thing, I'm making available to you with a URL at the end. The incredible bibliography that we have that I use to go into all of this. And what I want you to do more than anything in the world is take these files, take these markdown files, take the research bibliography, even take the plant UML diagrams, shove them into perplexity and start doing your own research. Or better yet, shove them into your make.com system or your Cassidy AI system and say, based on this bibliography, scour the web once a week and keep me up to date. Okay, because I don't have a newsletter to keep you up to date, and you have to be kept up to date on all of this stuff. So let's dive in. This is a global perspective on AI and regulatory compliance. Now, I'm going to show you how this stuff gets written with a live demo of my AI regulatory authors. So what happens is everybody gets together on committees. And then they parrot each other. There you go. These guys are actual AI regulatory authors. Not really, but theoretically. If you're looking at what I'm looking at, I took all of the research and I built a mind map of all of the research that boils really down to 5 topics. AI principles and ethics, AI accountability and trustworthiness, regulatory framework regulations or legislation itself, data and governance in that, classification and taxonomy, and perspectives. All of the content that you read can then be boiled down into something like this. What you look at it and you realign it, though, it then gives us foundational principles, regulatory implementation guidance, technical governance, accountability, international models then, and then future considerations of what's going on, because a lot of these guys built those things in there. We're going to explore the rapidly evolving, and I really do mean rapidly evolving, landscape of AI governance and frameworks, because in just the past 2 years, we've seen unprecedented development in AI capabilities matched by equally rapid evolution in how we attempt to govern these technologies. How we attempt to govern them is falling far behind the evolution of what's coming out, but it's catching up. The discussion is going to cover the key frameworks emerging globally, the practical implementation, and what this means for you working in AI technologies. Because at the end of this, I've actually given you some stuff you've got to do so that you can really implement this at the end of the day, because that's where it really takes root. The mind map you're looking at is shows the interconnected nature of these regulatory frameworks and how they look at it. If you could dig in, if you could look close, if hopefully you have a big screen, you're going to see Singapore overlaps with Canada, overlaps with the global landscape when it comes to models. Accountability is GAO, and then the taxonomy of trustworthiness. That taxonomy is a global taxonomy that our company signed on, our countries, I should say, signed on to, where we said we're going to all do this together, and this will be legally binding. And they signed this treaty. I was at that treaty signing, which was really cool. What was even more cool, by the way, was going into the pub afterwards and having a bunch of pints with a lot of these people and talking about how they got there. But being at the treaty signing itself was fantastic. And funny enough, next week on Monday, about this time, I'm going to be in Baltimore dealing with the National Institute of Standards and Technology and other organizations working on this locally here in the U.S. So if any of you are in Baltimore, give me a ring. We'll get together and I'll let you know what's going on. So let's look how these pieces fit together, because they fit together in foundational principles, okay? You've got the OECD framework, the CISA guidelines, the Council of Europe, and the Global Rights Focus. Now, all of these things that I'm showing you here, these are all plant UML diagrams that are written in text that can then be drawn. That's why they're not the prettiest, but they make themselves very, very, very editable. Our foundation for AI governance rests on 4 interconnected frameworks. All right. Each of these brings crucial perspective to how we develop and deploy AI systems responsibly. Let's begin with the OECD framework. Its human-centered values and civil liberties are at its core. By the way, I'm reading some of this. I didn't memorize all of this in the last couple of days, so I'm going to have to read a little bit if you don't mind. The transparency and explainability principles require AI systems to be understandable. Robustness and safety requirements ensure AI systems perform reliably. And then accountability and oversight mechanisms establish clear lines of responsibility. Okay. Now then they drill down into the CISA guidelines. They translate into the security imperatives realistically. Security and resiliency focus on protecting AI systems. Risk management and controls provide practical frameworks for threat assessment. Infrastructure protection acknowledges AI's growing role in critical systems, and the cybersecurity integration ensures security is built into AI from the ground up. Those then flow down into what the Council of Europe was saying. Okay, the Council of Europe is saying, look, guys, you gotta now thread in human rights and dignity principles to elevate individual protections to constitutional levels. You have to have democratic values and participation to ensure AI supports rather than undermines democratic institutions. The rule of law and accountability frameworks have to provide legal certainty and remedies, and then ethics and societal impact considerations require broader impact assessment. So see how these things then align with each other going down to then global rights and the global rights focus framework. Is particularly relevant to today's context because it adds specific protections. It's saying that privacy and data protection rights have to give individuals control over their information because it's that information that's feeding these LLMs. Fairness and non-discrimination principles have to protect the vulnerable populations. Individual autonomy has to ensure humans maintain meaningful control over AI decisions. And societal well-being measures have to require assessment of AI's broader social impact. This makes the 4-way framework particularly powerful in how each element reinforces each other. Okay, OECD requires transparency. CISA provides technical requirements. Council of Europe establishes legal obligations. And global rights focuses on security and serves human rights. In accountability, OECD gives us oversight. CISA, again, decides security, et cetera, et cetera. So these layers have to work together as foundational principles. And indeed, if you really look at what's going on, they do. All right, because these regulators worked together. They do read each other's material. Like, I was teasing with these two guys, talking back and forth and kind of, copying each other when they were going. That's not that far from the truth, and that's not far from fairy tale either. They need to work together. They need to become part and parcel of this global framework, this global threading of protecting us from AI and protecting uh, uh, AI from bad users and bad usage, and giving us a framework that assures security and accountability. Well, how has this stuff gotten built? Been built in 2 years. Okay. The very, very, very first people who came out with content was the United States National AI Initiative Act implementation. It represented as America's, I want to say, comprehensive approach to maintaining leadership. It's more of yeah, it was comprehensive for the United States, but it's more, how do I say, business oriented than the EU. The EU is very, very, not stodgy, but very structured. And the US implementation of the initiative was coordinated at a federal level, but it was really focused on developing technical standards and AI workforce preparation. And it did integrate ethical principles into the development practice, but it also said, look, we're capitalists. We've got to look at this as a capitalist way of moving forward. And we got to look at this at working with the organizations that are building this tech, because most of those organizations are here in the United States that are building it. All right. Well, as they were working on it, I'm actually on a couple of the ISO committees, WTC 31, 64, a couple of the other working groups, where they came out with their AI concepts. And they started working on this a little bit after the US folks started working on theirs. And funny enough, if you peel back some of these working groups, it's the same people. Okay. Mid 22 brought us ISO IEC's 22989, the AI concept standards, which provides crucial common terminology and frameworks. I got to go back and point that part out. Crucial terminology. Okay. We had to get the language together. Go to compliancedictionary.com. I didn't put that in any of these slides, and I should have. Go to compliancedictionary.com. That's a great reference point for all of the terminology that everybody's using for this stuff. It gives us, the ISO document gives us strict requirements for transparency, mandatory impact assessment for high impact systems, data protection requirements that align with OECD and other things, and then individual rights about automated decision making. Okay. NIST then, actually GDPR came in here as well. Colorado came in. There's Colorado down there. Singapore came in with their framework offering a model for how nations can adopt international principles. The EU Act gave us risk-based classification, which was really, really nice. That was huge. Strict requirements for high-risk applications. Certain prohibitions on AI issues. Very fact, there's a lot now on what you can and cannot do in text and data mining. As a matter of fact, go grab the paper up here. There's one down there. Where is it? Current legal scraping the web for use in text and data mining. Actually, the most recent paper I wrote, that came out of what Colorado wrote and EU wrote about what you can and cannot do at the very, very foundational beginning of what you're looking at for the rules and what you're looking at for bringing in content into your LLM system or your organizational RAG system. So, what's particularly notable in this timeline is the accelerated pace of regulatory development, increasing focus on practical implementation, the convergence of approaches across jurisdictions, and then the balance of innovation and protection. All right. Look at how fast, EU got started theirs in the Q1 of 2024, got it out the door by the end of Q2. Colorado didn't really start drafting until Q1, got it out in Q2. Council of Europe, AI convention, we started late Q2. We got it out by Q3. Compared to how long it took Singapore and NIST and GDPR and ISO and the US National Act. Organizations must now navigate this complex regulatory landscape while maintaining compliance across jurisdictions, while adapting to evolving requirements, while implementing practical controls and preparing for future regulations. So let's dive into what it is you got to do. A little bit more, though, on the international harmonization aspect of this, okay? Because this has got a balance. Global standards set the foundational principles, establish common terminology, and create measurable frameworks. Regional frameworks then give us adapting of those global standards to regional contexts, the development and of the enforcement mechanisms regionally, because you can't, enforce them globally, and you have to address cultural aspects as well. The national initiatives give us, very, very practical regulations for the countries. They will support innovations coming out of their countries, and they will be protecting their national interests. You've got to understand that. And then those technical standards give us, hopefully, how to interoperably apply what's going on, define more safety metrics, and then establish best practices that we have to evolve. So this is how they kind of feed each other going forward. Well, how do we apply this? All right, let's focus the last 10 minutes on that. Technical governance. It really divides into three things: risk management, data governance, and classification systems. You have to have these things in order to look at this. In risk management, there's risk and monitoring. All right, the risk assessments, the mitigation strategies that you have to have in place, the compliance checks then that you have to put in place on top of those mitigation strategies, and then incident responses. I'm going to pause there for a minute. Have you ever heard of XBRL? There are standards for how you have to respond. Risk management has to respond at a board level. Okay, you have to have somebody on your board that understands what's going on if you're using AI. That means that the compliance checks have to be real. Okay, that means that the mitigation strategies have to be something that you're really putting into place based on a no BS risk assessment. Okay, I can't emphasize that any more than this. When you download the deck, you're going to have a lot more text in here, and you're going to have a paper written on this that you need to understand. You're also going to have a presentation that you need to give at your board level on how to talk about this. Data governance. Let's start with data quality. Go all the way back to that paper that I told you about, the text and data mining paper. There's the additional flows. You've got to start with, can I use this data for AI? And then you should ask, should I use this data for AI? Go to compliancedictionary.com. It's free. Go into the search. Type in controlled unclassified information. It will give you a listing on the right of all of the types of content that make up controlled unclassified information. Controlled unclassified information is stuff that falls under PCI, stuff that falls under GDPR, stuff that falls under PIPEDA, stuff that falls under AI regulatory guidance about what you can and can't do. And all that stuff on the right, all that type of data is the stuff that ethically you should not be using in AI analysis. So you need to start with data quality. And then that privacy then controls go into there. Hey, Let's make sure that I'm not grabbing that stuff. But if I am grabbing any of that stuff, let's have privacy controls in there for what I can and cannot do. And then data access management of that which I'm dealing with in there. If I am allowing some of it to come in because I do have to do analysis, let's put privacy controls on there. But then let's put access controls on top of that to make sure that if we're building it in, it's not going anywhere. And then you're looking at the classification systems of context analysis, impact assessment, model evaluation, and output validation. You're having to ensure that at the output validation level that you've got attribution in there. Because all of the laws now, even the Creative Commons, are saying if you're going to use this, you're going to have proper attribution of where you got this content. When you're looking at the model evaluation, you're looking at, is this explainable? Because before that, you're going to have a risk assessment of what you're doing with this based on the context of how you're looking at it. All the regulatory systems are going to tell you, all the stuff that I gave you in your bibliography, you can stick it into Perplexity and say, based on this bibliography, tell me about context analysis. Tell me what I need to know about risk assessment or model evaluation. I could have done 45 minutes just on model evaluation based on that bibliography I gave you. How does this fit in with accountability? GAO gives us a wonderful accountability framework. Okay, you have to have an organizational structure in place that gives you policies and procedures and risk management. See that risk management on the bottom there? That's the thing that starts you off at the top up here on the left. Okay, that's how these work together. That gives you that risk management. That's where that data quality then fits in. That performance monitoring and that monitoring, all those things here come from these technical governance areas here, but then that has to go into how you have accountability in your organization and what feeds where. Go back and look at those regulatory guidelines and say, given my organizational structure, how do I perform that risk assessment? Given my organizational structure, who needs to deal with data quality? Given my organizational structure, who needs to be performing continuous monitoring? Do you see what I'm saying? Feed that stuff in. That your AI tools can actually read all of that and come back because that's in those regulations and tell you how to build those things out. Same thing with executive oversight. Who is that organizational structure? That's your board of directors. That's your ethics committee. That's your strategic planning committee. That's your AI development team, your data science team, your infrastructure team. Do you get how this fits together into implementation? All of this needs to work together. I color-coded this stuff for a reason. Because when you're talking to your board, they have to understand it at a simplified level. Talk about future focus, okay? You need to understand emerging technologies, regulatory evolution, implementation challenges, risk landscape, global coordination, and adaptive governance. Especially adaptive governance, all right? Wake up on that. Your organization can't do risk assessment for AI once a quarter. You have to build it in. Okay, you have to have dynamic risk assessment. I gave a presentation last time on explainable AI in what they're doing and how that comes into feeding preference-based reinforcement learning and how that feeds into bias that could creep in and how that feeds into other things that could creep in. Your analysis has to be dynamic. You have to look at how your risk landscape is going to change, implementation challenges for that stuff, watching the regulations. I wish I could bring up my Cassidy or my make.com. I've got automations out there that look for regulatory evolution and what that means and best practices for that and how to dynamically pull that in. I get a feed once a week that I have to go through and read to update me on what's going on. This is the take it from here part. Zotero.org has my bibliography, okay, of all those documents that are up there that feed all of this, freely available. If you go to serve.com, every file that I put together, every file that I put together here is what's available up at serve.com, okay? In here, there's a technical framework. Let's see, where'd it go? Implementing the policy .md. The .md files, navigating the frontiers. There's another, and all of the .md files are markdown files, so you can put it into anything you want for where you need to go, so that you have a high-level briefing document, you have a board-level briefing document, and you have even an outline for a PowerPoint. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your time, and I'm going to turn this back over to Kurt.
Thank you very much, Dorian. Fascinating talk. Looking at all of this, let me actually throw this back out to the audience and ask if we have questions. If you can put them into the chat. Not sure actually how the chat is working here. All right, so I don't actually see the public chat. So let's go back in. And a few questions that have come out as part of this. So when you're looking at this, one question that was asked earlier by Joaquin Malara was, how does the EU Act differ from different AI acts emerging around the world?
Yeah, let me pop that one up. So there we go. So the EU Act is very interestingly, when you look at stuff that's developed in the EU, it's developed in a very straightforward methodological way, where they start with what should you do, what can you do, what is the impact of what you do, how to protect those that that might be hurt from what you do. That's how they build everything. And so if you look at the regulatory framework, I aligned EU with the U.S. National AI Act and Colorado Senate bill. And EU is sort of, encompasses what GDPR was trying to do just on the privacy part, because they'd already thought about it on a more global level. They encompassed what the regulators were trying to do in serving up penalties around the world. They looked at what people were being sued for, and then put that on in there in a very in all-encompassing way. Theirs is more straightforward than the U.S. National Act, and much more straightforward than Colorado's Senate bill that came out. Colorado was more focused on getting business done with AI, which kind of fits into EU's overarching, okay, let's look at copyright and begin with copyright down to what can you do with the data, what could hurt somebody with the data, and move from there. Does that make sense?
It does.
So go ahead.
Yeah, with all of that, I mean, one of the things that I have seen is that there are very definite distinctions that you have between the EU, the United States, the United Kingdom, China, and elsewhere. Are you seeing specific patterns with regard to how different blocs are treating the question of regulatory reform Is, obviously there are issues like, to what extent do you want to be able to promote business versus protect uh, consumers and citizens? But what other aspects do you see within these particular frameworks, and how do you think that they are affecting the nature of the regulatory framework globally?
Well, it's very interesting when you look at the Chinese stuff, and I brought up the foundational principles. All of these folks worldwide, when they're writing their structures for AI protection, really fall within these 12 principles somewhere. I mean, China obviously doesn't really look at democratic values and participation as much. Neither does Singapore. They're just like, that's what you're going to go do. They're more on the rule of law and accountability than the human rights or dignity or societal impact. Well, actually, I can't say that. Singapore is very much into the societal impact of it. China very much is into and I thought this was very, very interesting. Instead of the societal impact, it's into the I guess I should say national asset impacts. How will the understanding of big data around water usage affect SCADA controls for dams? How will that affect, if we're going into automatic programming, how will mass quantities of information around these things affect this or that or the other? If we're looking at water usage in the country, so they're looking at it as, how do we use AI to protect our national assets? And then how is the big data around the usage of that protected to ensure that nobody's coming on in and screwing with that data so that it would affect how we protect our assets? Does that make sense?
That makes a lot of sense.
And it's very, very, very cool the way they're looking at that. As a matter of fact, I was talking to one of the guys from GRI who, has that ESG content. And they're saying, yeah, that's, it's not a draconian way, but it's if you look at it from their point of view, and somebody's building dynamic systems, it's how do we protect the data that's then going to drive the protection of our assets? And so it still really fits into these 12 blocks, because then they would go into okay, so instead of their societal impact going up the cybersecurity integration, they then go into infrastructure protection. So their line would connect differently when you look at it from their view. So it's there's these 12 blocks that are there, but then if you start looking at it differently, these 12 blocks might interconnect differently and weave differently going up. But I still haven't seen anything that anybody's written outside of these 12 blocks, which is very interesting.
No, it makes a great deal of sense, because, I mean, the nature of a lot of the AI that we're talking about here, really, once you get past a specific set of technologies, is really not that different from essentially any other large big data problem domain. In that you're essentially saying you have to govern it, you have to manage it. Now, the question then basically becomes, what is the shape of that governance? But the nature of governance itself is not something that's likely to vary significantly, from jurisdiction to jurisdiction, simply because these are management problems. They're not necessarily technological problems in their own rights.
Yeah, if you think of it this way, what they're really managing is you're managing systems in a system ecosphere that are using causal loops, just like people were managing that data. People were managing those processes before, and we had to have people controls out there. Now they're really just picking up those people controls and saying, okay, you've got to now make that systems ecosphere more transparent, more explainable. So we're looking at how the system is building in explainability and transparency, so that we can ensure that the human-centered values and civil liberties that are being co-developed on the side of that are coming together into security and resilience and risk management controls, for the system now building that instead of the people using it.
Uh-huh.
Remember when PCI first came out, when Graham Leach Bliley first came out, PIPEDA first came out, a lot of my patents were in how do you stop people from doing stupid stuff with that data.
Right.
Now it's how to keep systems from doing stupid stuff with that data. And when the system does stupid stuff, how to keep the system from hiding that the system did stupid stuff, because the systems are just as bad as people. They will hide it too. If you've ever seen any of the chat systems, return something completely and utterly fraudulent based on what you asked.
Right.
And then you catch them. They're like a little 2-year-old. Yeah, my bad.
Hey, so we are going to be closing out this session, but please feel free to take a 13-minute break, go get some popcorn, go use the restroom, jog around the block. We'll be back with the next panel discussion. We'll be extending this discussion into that one. So talk to you soon.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dorian. Thank you.